hit the globe for interpretation and select the language you would wish to participate with us today. Also, this webinar will be recorded. We're all ready. So again, welcome to the Power Building for People on the Move. This is a part of an 8-part series between Hispanics and Philanthropy, or HIP, and the International Community Foundation that centers the voices across the Americas. We have a few goals for our time together today. One of the pieces is to show the connection among the power building strategies in the US for migrant-led organizations, with migrant-led organizations doing power building work in Latin America, or LATAM. We want to emphasize the overlaps with the migration and refugee movements in the US and LATAM share visions and organizing movements. We also want to foster an opportunity for relationships and provide introductions between US and Latin American movement leaders. So we have 3 leaders with us today. I will be the moderator. My name is Bayoán, Roselló, Cornier. I'm excited to spend this time together with all of you. Before we get into anything that has to do with the actual webinar piece, I want to make sure that we have a land acknowledgement before I discuss how I fit into the conversation as a moderator in HIP's work. I want to acknowledge that I live in Los Angeles currently, that I live and work and worship and play on stolen lands, that I live on the unceded lands of the Tongva peoples. I ask you to join me in this acknowledgement of Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as their future generations. HIP acknowledges that many of our institutions have been founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous people, including those whose lands our communities are located on. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to the beginning of the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. So I'm Bayoán. It's a little bit about my background. I'm a first-generation US-born Boricua. I was born and raised in Boston and was involved at a very early age in the Puerto Rican political prisoners movement and the Independentista movement. My heritage and my ideology of Puerto Rico status is that of a US colony. This is a perspective that's very critical and part of my identity and the way that I choose to move in the world and the work that I do. Before transitioning to philanthropy about 5 years ago, I spent over 10 years, first as a union organizer in New York, and then as a community organizer in Boston, working with communities of color. As the director of Power Building and Justice at HIP, I bring in my experiences doing movement building work that centers communities, experiences, expertise, agency, and their voice into the spaces that they have historically been excluded from. I also work to move from traditionally extractive philanthropic practices to more restorative and regenerative models. And so this is really important to the way that I move in the world, the way that I want philanthropy to show up. And I'm excited to have these leaders with us today to talk specifically around migration. HIP's migration program specifically mobilizes resources to fund, strengthen frontline organizations defending the rights of people on the move. Through resourcing frontline organizations, we highlight the opportunities and address the challenges people face while on the move and beyond. Overall, we provide a greater understanding and narrative change of human mobility, the intersectionalism, and root causes to funders and other allies. We understand that migration is grounded in many intersectional issues, including but not limited to economic opportunity, political freedom, and equities in the realms of race, gender, social, and economical, and climate change and violence. This work requires a multi-pronged approach addressing both roots of migration and protection of immigrants along their journeys upon arrival and return. So I want to introduce the speakers now. Really excited to have Michelle, Juan, José, and Alejandro with us today. Michelle Serrano, she was born in Brownsville, Texas, is mixed indigenous, and comes from a long line of luchadores across the cosmic diaspora. Her life force has been a catalyst for transformation in the South Texas Rio Grande Valley region, having worked side by side with communities on strategies that range from traditional social justice, media campaigns, to relational organizing in the visual and performing arts. She is a co-founder of Brownsville Artists and Musicians, BAM, and was a special guest speaker for TED Talks Brownsville's Mujeres Moving Mountains. Michelle studied public policy and the visual arts from the legacy institutions of the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. She has a BA in public service, an MPA in public administration. Michelle enjoys cooking, traveling, photography, and is a card-carrying member of the BTS Army. Not gonna lie, had to look up what BTS was, and it's that Korean pop group that are like pretty big worldwide. Next, Juan José Correa, antropólogo, realizador audiovisual y gestor cultural colombiano, refugiado en Argentina. Él es el director del Festival Internacional de Cine Colombia Migrante. Sus principales temáticas de trabajo son la memoria, el arte, la migración forzada. Pertenece a la organización MECOPA, Migrantes y Exiliados Colombianos por la Paz, desde donde apuestan a procesos de acompañamiento y visibilización a personas con necesidades de protección internacional. And the last one that's joining us today is Alejandro Daly. He is an MPA candidate at Columbia University. Over the last 4 years, he was the director of the Right to Disobey, a social platform that aims to empower civil society in Colombia to create social change and influence public policies around issues such as air pollution, climate change, refugee rights, and peaceful mobilization. In addition, he's the co-founder of Xenophobia Barometer, the first platform in Latin America to use social listening and machine learning to analyze the narratives around the migrants and refugees in social media to positively transform them. In 2021, the Global Forum on Migration Development awarded Alejandro first place in the Youth Leadership and Innovation Award. Welcome them all, please. Give them a round of applause with a little emoji of applause. So I want to make sure, Michelle, Juan, and Alejandro, you have an opportunity to potentially share something that I might have missed that I think is important to bring into today's conversation before I jump into my questions.
Perhaps I can start saying that I don't know why I don't put that on the video, but that's so important. I'm a Venezuelan Portuguese-based migrant, so I'm Venezuelan. I had to flee the country 9 years ago, and that's why I went to Colombia, and that's like a major motivator of why I work with people.
Thank you, Alejandro. Okay, so we're going to start off with the questions now. I want to make sure that we understand that I want to have a conversation. I want it to be organic. So if I ask someone a specific question, feel free to also jump in if you have a perspective to share to continue that dialogue. But to start off, I want everyone to answer this question, starting with Michelle and then Juan Jose, and then Alejandro, you can wrap it up. And the question is, what is the perspective of power building in your organization?
Thanks for that question. For us, we're located on the border of the Rio Grande Valley and Tamaulipas. So we're basically northern Mexico or the southernmost part of Texas. And if we all know Texas very well, then we know that it's a highly controversial state with lots of policies that affect millions of people. The RGV is no exception to that. The Rio Grande Valley is the population density is highly Hispanic or Latinx, like whatever you prefer to call these folks. But that doesn't mean that it is a highly like there aren't a lot of opportunities here. So when we're power building, when we're reaching out to communities, we also have to understand that our communities are working and they're busy and they're raising children and families and just trying to survive. So when you want to power build, you can't just say, hey, we're going to show up for a protest. Hey, we're going to plan. We're going to make signs. That comes in, but we also have to like be part of community, earn trust, talk about things that aren't necessarily involved with activism. Be present in the moment, care about the people. Those are things that are absolutely important. Those are things that we've had shortfalls in the past when we think about nonprofits or NPICs, which is short for nonprofit industrial complex. There is this notion that people will just work for you if you give them money, but people also need restorative care. And a lot of times when we're power building, we have to think about how we can heal from the traumas that we have all incurred over the years. So currently we are focused on the practices introduced by Adrienne Marie Brown, specifically in the book Emergent Strategies. And we do take on this perspective that small is all. So small acts of community building for us would be like getting together on a Friday afternoon and taking a walk outside and thinking about nature. We are highly focused on decolonial practice, and we want our folks to feel comfortable and natural in accepting nature as it is. I don't think that people get an opportunity to do that very often. So we highly encourage it, and we highly encourage people to get in touch with their ancestors and their roots while we're doing that, which is very helpful in coming up with new ideas and new perspectives that intersect along our migratory corridor, which the Rio Grande Valley is one major migratory corridor for animals and people. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Michelle. Really appreciate that. I just want to make sure that you uplift that your organization. I don't know if I mentioned it in the bio introduction.
Oh, our organization is Voces Unidas. It's formerly the Rio Grande Valley Equal Voice Network. That was defunded a while back, and our network weaver, our leader, Cristina Patiño, who was unwilling to give up on the communities that had been out there. We were abandoned. And so we worked very, very hard to find an alternative, which created Voces Unidas, which is starting off small again, but we have the respect and the confidence of the community around us because they've worked with us from prior. So it's very much a benefit to, even though it was scary at the time, it was very much a benefit to move forward with our work and be able to streamline it in a way that best agrees with our politics, and our internal politics truly are different from traditional modes of nonprofit management. So there's that. So thank you.
Thank you. And small is all, as you said earlier.
Small is all, yes.
That's right. So I want to give Juan José also the opportunity to respond to your organization's perspective on power building.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Bayoán. Un saludo a Alejandro y a Michelle, también que están acá. Un gusto compartir con ustedes hoy. Un saludo a todas y todos quienes están conectados. Bueno, yo pertenezco a Migrantes y Exiliados Colombianos por la Paz. MECOPA se llama la organización. Es una organización que está en México, Colombia y Argentina. Y nosotros somos una organización que trabaja por las personas con necesidad de protección internacional. Trabajamos desde un enfoque de derechos humanos y buscamos, digamos, velar por la participación, la inclusión y pues, la garantía de los derechos humanos de distintos migrantes, exiliados y pues, personas refugiadas en distintos lugares, ¿no? En un principio nosotros comenzamos haciendo un trabajo desde las experiencias propias con personas colombianas y colombianos, en particular pues por nuestra nacionalidad, pero después en nuestros lugares de acogida, en nuestros países de acogida, comenzamos a ampliar, digamos, a otras nacionalidades el trabajo que hacemos desde la organización, pues debido a la gran cantidad de personas migrantes con necesidad de protección internacional. Nos hemos enfocado mucho en esta temática de la protección internacional, de lo que sería el refugio y demás, ya que es algo que creemos que tiene que prestarse o que tiene que tener una especial atención hoy por hoy en este mundo, digamos, tan globalizado y pues que al mismo tiempo genera tantos movimientos y tantos flujos de personas, ¿no? Entonces, por ahí creemos que una parte muy importante y una parte que genera una problemática vigente de la migración es todo este tema del refugio o de la migración forzada y demás. Y nos hemos planteado, pues, incluir distintos proyectos como organización y participar con distintos proyectos como organización para poder agrupar, digamos, a distintas personas refugiadas, poderles acercar muchos derechos humanos y pues muchas capacidades de vivir mejor en los lugares donde se encuentran y poder también pues tener una participación activa dentro de nuestros países de acogida, pues no solamente como migrantes o como ciudadanos, sino también como ciudadanos activos y activas y como ciudadanos partícipes de las políticas que se deciden día a día en cada estado, ¿no? Esa es un poco nuestra tarea. Se ha venido tallando desde distintos proyectos, como les decía, y quiero mencionar tres en particular. El primero es todo el marco que hicimos con la Comisión de la Verdad en Colombia. Recientemente, para quienes no conocen tanto el contexto, pues se hizo un tratado de paz, un acuerdo de paz con la guerrilla de las FARC y después de este acuerdo de paz, de estos acuerdos de paz, surgieron distintas instituciones que buscaban, digamos, pues acercar al país hacia un proceso de paz, ¿no? Dentro de esas, una de las instituciones se encargó de encontrar el relato de la verdad de la historia de conflicto tan larga que tenemos. Eso fue la Comisión de la Verdad. Y es la primera vez que una Comisión de la Verdad en el mundo empieza a enfocarse acerca de las personas que están afuera. Así que nosotros hicimos un capítulo muy importante que se llama La Colombia fuera de Colombia y habla del exilio y de las personas que nos hemos tenido que ir del país a causa del conflicto armado. Ese fue un trabajo que hicimos a lo largo de 5 años, que cerramos recientemente y que es capaz uno de los trabajos más importantes que hemos hecho. Después hay un trabajo que recientemente acaba de cerrar, que hicimos como organización y que este es un trabajo que yo dirijo personalmente desde MECOPA y otras organizaciones alrededor del mundo, en 11 países alrededor del mundo, que es el Festival Internacional de Cine Colombia Migrante. Y este es un festival que ha buscado visibilizar el exilio y el refugio colombiano en distintos países del mundo a través del cine. Es un festival que ha tenido mucha acogida, que pues ha tenido unos números impresionantes porque hemos proyectado alrededor de 12 países en el mundo, como decía. Y bueno, digamos que ha sido bastante importante para nosotros también como organización generar estos proyectos. Y bueno, creo que eso es un poco como lo que realizamos nosotras y nosotros. Gracias.
Gracias, Juan José. Alejandro, seguimos a ti.
Same question.
Same question. What is the perspective on power building in your organization? Yes.
Perhaps to complement what Michelle and Juan Jose already said, in our case, we are a youth-led organization, so all the organization is led by people among 26 to 18, and we're 40 people. So we have a real strong commitment of the youth-led part, but it's not just youth-led, but we're an organization that works for people on the move. So we want migrants and refugees, forcibly displaced migrants to be among not only for, let's say this way, like the junior roles. No, we want them to be the decision makers. Does that mean that we like create like selection processes that are directly like linked to migrants and refugees? Yes. Some people say that, oh, you need to choose the best person. And we're like, no, we're choosing the best migrant and refugee out there because we want that person to feel that they have a space here where they can take decisions. And when we're talking about power building, I think we're talking about as well of principles and the values of our organizations. If we want to create power building, I mean, we could be talking about like a social movement, which I would put on the other side of the conversation, but if we're talking about organizations, nonprofits, and we want to empower people on the move, that's completely related to your values as an organization, your principles and your purpose statement. In our case, that means we can take 6 months to find the ideal person to lead a role because we want that person to be a forcibly displaced migrant from Venezuela. And perhaps we don't know where they are, but we want to take 6 months to find them. And that's like part of our of creating this environment to empower people is also fostering an environment where decisions can be where decisions can be made. And that doesn't happen very often. I mean, I was a forcibly displaced migrant from Venezuela that ended up running an NGO in Colombia that is, I don't know, between the 30 largest NGO of the country. And when we had meetings with all the other like NGOs, I was the only Venezuelan. That made my organization had different like actions. I was the only one bringing migration to the agenda. I was saying, yeah, okay, you're doing this program, and why in the prerequisite it says only for Colombians? I mean, we're 2 million Venezuelans in Colombia. Why would you do that? Or why don't you add a space for other type of documents more than Cédula de Ciudadanía? Because I have a PEP, and that's like 20 numbers, meaning that there's another identification like paper that has like longer numbers. And those changes, people don't think about them because they're not thinking from the perspective of insert X community. In my case, people on the move.
Thank you, Alejandro. Appreciate that. I have a follow-up to, as you're one of the potentially the youngest person on the panel. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to age anyone, but you're in school, right? You're in New York.
Perhaps I am 25.
Potentially. I just want to see, like, working with such a young population of people and being based right now in New York, like, how is your strategy connected with strategies in other regions of Latin America?
I think we need to understand migration as what it is, that is a global phenomenon. So we're talking, for example, about climate refugees, which is such a strong topic in Central America. And we want to have that conversation across the region. We need to see what other people in the region are doing and try to apply those models as well. For example, right now we're working alongside HIP on a project to understand better how migration connects with climate justice. And we could have done that only for Central America or only for Colombia, but we are doing it across all the region because we need to understand what is the regional narrative. And I think that's something that perhaps we forget time to time. I think other regions in the world understand better how to act as a region than Latin America and the Caribbean. And I feel when we're talking about empowering people on the move and like also youth-led initiatives, it's like two underrepresented communities, young people and people on the move. You need like joining efforts to advance that agenda. It cannot be only Colombia. It needs to be a regional perspective.
Michelle, as someone who's working the Rio Grande Valley and on a border line right between what is like the United States and Mexico, how have you seen the refugee, and I think Alejandro, even bringing up the climate like phenomenon, the climate justice, have you seen potential migration shift when it comes to the climate justice theme? Is it something that you've experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. When we first started having the suspension of asylum during the Trump administration, we were coming across people that were, not fitting these boxes that people needed. They weren't leaving because they were being politically repressed. They were leaving because they were terrorized by like the discord that happens from climate change. I mean, climate change is not something that's just the weather got bad and it flooded or the fires. It's more than that. It's at the intersection of everything else that's affecting us. It was just weird to see so many people who were not qualified to pass. And then, of course, they made it so like nobody could pass after that. But the proof was there that we were having mass migration. People were looking for places that were safe to live, places where they could feed their children. We saw it mostly in Central America, especially that was suffering through some major hurricanes and food shortages. Guatemala and Honduras especially were experiencing that, and they were coming here, and the experience was worse for them, if anything, because these are groups, a lot of these groups, I mean, they've been kind of isolated in their places. A lot of them don't even speak Spanish. When we think about Hispanic issues and we talk about people, migrants, which I don't even like using the word migrant, I would prefer using migrating people, because it really does dehumanize the cause and the people who are coming, when we just reduce them to an action or just like a non-being. These are people who are coming, and there is a lot of diffusion of who these people are when we start communicating. Like, words have powerful language, and the level of dehumanization that was coming from state actors, the media who was parroting it, all of that we were seeing at the border, more so than anywhere else. And being on the American side and seeing all of this happen, we know that much of the things that get reported is false or blown out of proportion or different, and these things, all of these have an influence on what our president decides to do, which I mean, in Trump's case, be terrible to people and treat them as awful as possible so they don't come, which we know won't change things because they kept coming, or like do the Biden thing and just disregard that the things are happening and pretend that everything's fine, which they're not. Like, things are still happening. We are in a position of power in the United States. It's something that Voces Unidas sees as an opportunity to start educating people about who is coming, why people are coming, the discord that is happening through climate injustice, the discord that occurs through unchecked corporate exploitation of the global South. All of these things are not just solely affecting the global South, but this whole entire world. It will come to the North eventually. And we just believe that if we just give people more information and humanize the people that are coming, through just reconnecting with themselves and their own ancestry and their own past that is indigenous, because surely we all come from an indigenous background. Even white people have an indigenous background. That, like, we must understand that it is the earth that we have to be fighting for, and the people on earth who are leaving, we should have better responsibility for that. It's something that we are communicating and talking about in our power building when we talk about these things with our existing constituency, like, who may not be migrating people, but they are immigrants for the most part, and they all understand the struggle, and they're the best people to be leading this and communicating these things from a perspective of love and a perspective of understanding, something that we are not afforded. There's definitely more to it than just environment, but we can all agree that if it weren't for these drastic changes in our global environments, we would not be having such extreme migratory just migratory instances like we've been having from Central America.
Yeah.
And again, we always try to remind everybody of that when we're communicating on the person-to-person level. These are things that don't get they don't make it to the media. They don't make it to the cutting room floor. It's not sexy enough. And I will say one last thing about the way that we report on crime in the United States. Is that the way that gets reported over here, that to them is like an easy communications job. Like, I'm just going to put out this press release that Border Patrol put out. I'm going to put out this press release that the police put out, without any context or background, or even counter information from the information that's shared. So immediately the American public is already receiving a pipeline of just negative information regarding migrating people who are coming, and those those are very strong voices. It is like, as much as Voces Unidas is as loud as we can be, we are the Rio Grande Valley and not the United States in itself. And the United States has struggled. Senators, the representatives, any elected leaders have struggled to understand who we are as a people, living a binational life, understanding life on both sides of the border, speaking both languages, having two cultures, not quite fitting into either. Like, they need to center what we've been saying, and that shows a lot in like a lot of this recovery that's happening with migrating people, like in places in New York and other places that are now experiencing like these stunts that these governors have been putting everyone through, because they didn't think that it would happen to them. They thought it was a border-wide issue. And I'll tell you one last thing and I'll stop. The people who have been showing up to this are not extraordinary people. They're everyday people who are just showing up to help. And it's always been just ordinary people who have been showing up to help. And they have helped create a system that works and is getting repeated in these larger cities. Had the media been kind enough to amplify the people doing the work versus the Border Patrol and the president, I feel that we wouldn't have had these kinds of struggles with other cities to begin with. People would have had more resources to be able to act quickly and not make it such a media circus where the mayor of New York has to declare an emergency. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. And I think you kind of shifted the conversation into the next space that I wanted to move it into, and this will go to Juan, Jose. Understanding that like people on the move is a global phenomenon, how does policy, like, one, influence the work that MECOPA is doing, both like policy within Argentina, Colombia, or other countries influence the work that you're doing, or have an impact on the work that you're doing through MECOPA?
Sí, pues de entrada, digamos, pensar también en lo que decía Michelle, que la migración nos atraviesa a todas y todos en algún momento de la vida o todas en algún momento de la vida hemos migrado. Así que yo creo que ya hay un primer impacto de sensibilización personal al reconocernos como migrantes, porque todas y todos hemos migrado de alguna forma, ¿no? Así sea migraciones dentro de la ciudad o migraciones campo-ciudad dentro del mismo país o internacionales, ya hay como digamos un primer impacto de la migración en nuestras vidas. Así que por ahí ya podemos reconocer que estamos en constante movimiento y que todas y todos somos migrantes, y esto digamos es como un paso inicial para poder ver el fenómeno global que es la migración. Sin embargo, pues más allá de esto, la migración sí pues está digamos como a grandes escalas como fenómeno global, está pues digamos intrínsecamente relacionada con temas económicos, políticos, ambientales y demás, que creo que eso nos atraviesan a todas y a todos, ¿no? Así que trabajar, digamos, por temas de justicia, por ejemplo, para los migrantes, es también trabajar por ejemplo, justicia económica o justicia climática o demás, ya que muchas de las personas que están migrando por situaciones pues que no son deseadas muchas veces en su país de origen, ¿no? En muchos casos por situaciones económicas, como decía antes, en muchos casos por situaciones políticas, ambientales, demás, que tienen que, no sé, es decir, que tienen que salir a buscar pues un mejor futuro en otros lugares, ¿no? Así que por ahí también la sensibilización, pues parte también de buscar cuáles son esos fenómenos globales que tenemos para empezar a trabajar en estos, ¿no? Después ya creo que hay unos campos de incidencia más directos que empiezan a bajar desde lo global, que es la migración, a lo puntual, que es como los marcos legislativos que tiene cada país o cada estado, por ejemplo, para entender la migración y el paso de los migrantes por cada frontera. Y yo creo que pues hay que estar al tanto, digamos, de todo esto, ¿no? Y es entender que, por ejemplo, pues son distintas las normas que tiene migrar hacia Estados Unidos a migrar hacia Argentina. Entonces ahí pues tenemos que plantearnos, digamos, también, claro, una globalidad respecto a cómo pensarnos la migración, en cómo humanizar a las personas migrantes, pero también una localidad en pensar específicamente cómo desde cada lugar podemos impactar positivamente en la vida de tantas y tantos migrantes y pues en nuestro caso en particular de tantas personas con necesidad de refugio. Particularmente acá en Argentina, pues este es un estado que tiene una ley de migración muy, digamos, muy innovadora para lo que es el siglo XXI. Por ejemplo, acá no se puede deportar a ninguna persona, es prohibido por la ley argentina deportar, así que eso es pues algo bastante innovador. Acá llegan las personas y buscan la forma de regularizar.
José, perdimos el audio.
¿Me escuchan?
Ya, sí, sí.
Sí. Eh, Sí, no, creo que era un tema de internet. Sí, no, les decía que también hay que localizarse, digamos, que es distinto, por ejemplo, migrar hacia Argentina, donde los impactos y los retos son muy diferentes a lo que es migrar hacia el norte, ¿no? México o Estados Unidos tienen unas políticas muy distintas, por ejemplo, de trato hacia los migrantes. Y después ya hay algunos temas de derechos humanos que sí creo que hay que prestarles especial atención y es pues las condiciones tan difíciles en que se está migrando. Muchas personas que migran, por ejemplo, hacia Estados Unidos de forma irregular, pues pasan por unas atrocidades tremendas. Por ejemplo, ahora ha estado muy famoso, inclusive salió en el New York Times, todo lo que es pasar por el tapón del Darién, que es la frontera entre Panamá y Colombia, que es terrible. Hay miles de venezolanas, venezolanos, haitianos, dominicanos, africanos y demás que están intentando desde el sur empezar a hacer dinero y subir hacia Estados Unidos y pasan por situaciones tremendas que yo creo que hay que poner en la lupa y que tienen que atravesarnos a todas y a todos, ¿no? Que eso sí es algo transfronterizo que tenemos que trabajar y es ver cómo generamos condiciones dignas para que las personas puedan migrar dignamente, ¿no? Yo me uno mucho a lo que dice Michelle y es que en algún punto migrar es un acto y una situación de vida y no es algo que te defina como persona. Es una decisión que uno tiene que tomar en muchos casos forzosamente o en muchos casos por otro tipo de condiciones que están en el entorno, pero que es un acto que no debe definir a una persona únicamente como un migrante, sino que debe simplemente ser una acción que tiene que pues, buscar la protección de la persona y de la humanidad de la persona. Pues en ese caso yo creo que sí, nuestro trabajo como MECOPA, por ejemplo, ha sido entender mucho eso, la humanidad que tienen las personas que están migrando, la dignidad y los derechos humanos que tienen al atravesar cualquier estado. Y ese es prácticamente nuestro trabajo, visibilizar todo eso, por un lado, y por el otro lado, hacer un acompañamiento íntegro en que se velen los derechos humanos de las personas atravesando cualquier frontera que tenga que atravesar. Después, por último, hay como un tema del festival que acabamos de hacer recientemente en temas de visibilización. Recientemente en Tijuana, en la frontera entre Tijuana y San Diego, justo en el muro de frontera, por medio del Festival de Cine, proyectamos una película justo en el muro de frontera y se la proyectamos a una cantidad de migrantes varados o estacionados que hay en estas playas de Tijuana que pues, buscan cruzar hacia Estados Unidos. Y fue una película muy impactante porque es una película que se llama Álvaro, que es de un migrante colombiano en Nueva York que pues además ha pasado por un montón de situaciones muy malas y muestra cómo realmente la cara del sueño americano, ¿no? Entre comillas, de no todo es hermoso en viviendo el sueño americano, sino que es durísimo el sueño americano. Entonces, bueno, pudimos proyectar justamente en el muro de frontera y eso, pues más allá de la acción física de proyectar allá, es la carga simbólica y el peso que tiene todo esto. Las acciones simbólicas y las acciones artísticas, que son mucho las que yo personalmente trabajo, tienen un peso muy importante para construir, digamos, una sensibilización acerca de la migración, ¿no? Entonces, pues hay que apuntarle mucho también a ese tipo de acciones, ¿sí? Por un lado también es hacer acompañamiento, visibilización y demás, pero por el otro lado está el arte y formas de sensibilizar a la gente en el cotidiano acerca pues de esta realidad del migrante, ¿no? Y de la realidad, por ejemplo, de cómo lo que le toca ya a una persona que vive en Estados Unidos, que vive en Nueva York, puntualmente vivir día a día, ¿no? Por ejemplo. Entonces, bueno, nomás anotando eso ahí para terminar.
Gracias, Jose. Actually, I see a deep connection between the work that you do in the cinema and the work that I think that Michelle has done through the BAM work. So it's the art like really transfers like or goes beyond borders. I want to make sure to give Alejandro, I see that your hand's up, an opportunity to hop in.
Perhaps this is problematizing. I don't know if that's a word in English, so I'm gonna say in Spanish so the people that translate can figure out how to say that. Creo que voy a problematizar un poco la situación, because I do believe that migration defines a lot of the identity of a person, and I think that's fine. More than fine, I mean, I don't think that's a good thing, but it's a thing to understand in order to make power building happen. Because I think power building comes from identity. And when you neglect migration as part of an identity, which is my struggle between integration and assimilation processes, there's so many things that don't happen in your self-awareness scheme. Understanding being a, and this actually differs between all the categories of forcibly displacement, being a migrant, economic migrant, being a forcibly displaced migrant, being a refugee, the causes for which I migrate, those all affect identities. And the first step to power building to me is to understand and deal with that, what we call el duelo migratorio. Because we need to grieve that, to acknowledge that, then to power build. I agree with Juan Jose and Michelle in terms of the arts as part of all this. That's how my advocacy started and continues. For example, we printed around 500 photographs of Venezuelan migrants and refugees, and we put them on the border between Colombia and Venezuela in the Simon Bolivar Bridge. We put them all there on the streets, so people that were crossing the bridge will see all the pictures of Venezuelan. And of course, that made like such a statement. It was on the first page of every single media in Colombia. But we had to take 500 pictures where we took, every time that we took a picture, we had a conversation. And people were like, well, I don't want to be there because I don't want that to define me, that part of being a migrant. And then 45 minutes afterwards, you had such a profound conversation, then cry again, and say, yes, okay, I can do this. And I think that's, when we're talking about power building, I know it sucks to be defined as a migrant, because it sucks. You go out and you're like, oh, this sucks. I don't want to be defined as a migrant. And then you're like, but I am.
Okay.
I am, and that's important.
No, Alejandro, thank you for the thing. I think like the healing journey that people have to go through, like to like heal in a very like fundamental human space before being able to move out and do power building, is a very important piece of the work when we're talking about power building and justice. I see that Juan Jose wants to jump in. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for any Q&As from audience members. So if you want to drop them in the chat while Juan Jose like kind of wraps up this final thought, I will lift them up.
Sí, no, simplemente para aclarar un poco, sí, yo también creo, o sea, comparto lo que dice Alejandro, también creo que pues cuando se es migrante o cuando se migra, eso hace parte absoluta de la identidad como persona, marca y divide en dos la vida después de migrarse. Pero creo que un tema, digamos, es como la identidad de uno como migrante y cómo eso marca, digamos, a la persona. Y otra cosa de pronto, pues a lo que yo me refería, digamos, en no encapsular a las personas siempre como migrantes en torno a eso, es de pronto a los tratamientos que dan los estados en las fronteras, ¿no? Siempre hay como una deshumanización que se hace a la persona al ser migrante y se refiere como un caso, como un migrante más, no sé, o algo así, pues sabiendo que son personas que están realizando un acto que es el acto de migrar, digamos, y creo que eso es pues algo que va influenciado por otros temas que pues como decía anteriormente, tienen que ver con distintas fuerzas más grandes, puede ser algo así, pero que en sí, pues la identidad de la persona sí se construye pues a través de estos temas tan trascendentales, por ejemplo, como la migración, ¿no? Entonces sí, ahí sí, de acuerdo con lo que dice Alejandro.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Gracias, Juan José. Do we have any questions? I think this is the time for questions, the Q&A portion of the webinar. If none are lifted up, I have many more questions to ask, so I can handle that. But please raise your hand or drop a question in the chat. One of the next pieces that I wanted to kind of get into was really thinking about HIP as a philanthropic serving organization, having like funds that we're able to re-grant, but also offering other resources. How can funders support the movement building frontline work that you're doing? And I will let Michelle start.
Okay.
Jump in on
You need to let go of the way that you measure success. Just let it go, because success does not happen in a year, in 2 years, whatever your foundational goals are. It's not going to happen. All you're doing is putting a lot of pressure on an already stressed group to hit the mark so they can continue funding, to just barely get by. They are not getting the food that their soul needs. What a lot of people need is rest. So in between the hard work that happens, and I can assure you that there are plenty of people here in the Rio Grande Valley who are going out there and they're meeting migrants or migrating people and doing the work, but they need to heal. And we do not get the resources to heal. Like, it is not included. And we have way too much pressure to hit those goals that you want to see, to show that we are successful. I think this is a human problem. This is not a business problem. We should not be taking a business format. We shouldn't be applying business in any form, sense, or shape in this. And I understand that there are processes and rules. We've talked a lot about processes and rules throughout this, but processes and rules are actually counterintuitive to like the organic form of humanity, of life itself. If we want to let go of, the harm that we cause people, is funders especially, like if you want to not be a person who does harm, then you need to let go and just give them some money to have a some sort of community like engagement with one another that appreciates one another. If you'll go to our latest Facebook post, you can see that we had a storytelling event. We held it on the land right next to the border wall, and we shared stories that we worked on throughout the year. And we got in touch with our ancestral roots, and we made prayers, and we did the things that nobody is ever allowed to do when we're doing work out on the front line. And that is so important, because if these folks cannot heal, if they cannot come out of it, they burn out and they go away. And then we're just in an endless cycle. And that's why we're so reliant on young people and young people and young people. And let me tell you something. There are older people, elderly people, much respected leaders in our lives who are able to do the work. They just need that support. And if you give the support, you're going to get better results, much better results. And stop holding these goals over people's heads the way that you do. It just is counterintuitive to this idea of humanity in itself. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We actually have a question in the chat, which I will read out loud. This is from Silvia Leal. Gracias. Quisiera preguntarles si conocen o implementan estrategias que permitan trascender del acompañamiento individual inicial y lo que Michelle y Alejandro han hablado como duelo migratorio, empezar por lo pequeño a procesos que tengan una repercusión colectiva, tal vez en lo político, en lo social, máxime que las actuales políticas migratorias en las regiones son cada vez más estrictas? It's a very long question, but it's a very important question. So thank you very much, Silvia, for lifting this up. Anyone of the panel could jump in.
Just really quick on that.
Yeah.
When I also talked about funders and funding, this is also another important part. I think that sometimes we don't fund the things that need to be funded. Like if we're talking about advocacy work or like connecting people to resources, including mental health resources and things like that, they're not coming. We just need more funding in general to be able to address migrating people's needs when they're coming. Because right now what they're doing is trying to do shelter and health. And maybe there's some volunteer lawyers there who are doing it, but there's nothing else happening. Like these people, they're unfortunately like left in the elements. It's getting colder now. I mean, we've had this happen over and over again, repeatedly. Like there is no system because we don't have the funding for it. Like if we want advocacy work, if we want healing work, if we want all of that to happen, like we need to fund more. And we need to be more committed to it and stop and again let go of this whole like I want to see results. I want to see like a person say that they're mentally healthier now and I want a qualitative analysis of it. No, please no. Like healing is a long-term journey. We all have some sort of traumas in our lives, and I can guarantee all of you that you do not feel better after 3 or 4 therapist sessions. Like that is a lifelong journey. If you can commit yourself to a lifelong journey with us until we can change the way that people are, the way people are treated when they come through here, then maybe there will be better systems in place, better organizations at hand that can do that. But until then, all we have are what we have. And that unfortunately is not enough yet. And that's why I've made like such a strong appeal to like, you know, do more, be more. Like, yes, there's like lots of like, it's very inspirational to hear everything that's happening in Latin America, but like the buck stops at and in the United States, like all of a sudden, like we're all crowdfunding over here because the funders didn't give us enough funding. And we can't be like that. Like we shouldn't have to be worried about how we're going to get the money to help people mentally, physically, spiritually. I'll pass it to somebody else to take more.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. And thank you for like, this is an important question to ask and to push funders, right? To think beyond traditional philanthropy. I also want to make sure to give an opportunity to answer Silvia's question in the chat. I don't know if Alejandro or Juan Jose have a response.
I'm going to answer in Spanish, porque la pregunta está en español. Gracias, Silvia, por la pregunta. Creo que lo primero va por hacer un ejercicio de generar conciencia sobre el duelo migratorio en las mismas organizaciones de personas migrantes y refugiadas, por un lado. Segundo, en las organizaciones internacionales, es decir, ACNUR, OIM, inserte cualquiera pues, de las que hacen como grandes trabajos con personas migrantes y refugiadas, y luego con los gobiernos. Y digamos, en mi experiencia ha sido muy interesante ver cómo nosotros, por ejemplo, comenzamos a hacer procesos de duelo migratorio con una herramienta que creamos que se llama el libro viajero, que es un libro físico en el que la gente escribe sus historias de migración. Y nosotros arrancamos en el Museo de Arte Moderno de Bogotá. Hicimos un taller con la gente del museo y se llenó de personas migrantes venezolanas contando sus historias. Eso se convirtió en un libro digital. Y ya comenzó la segunda etapa del proyecto, lo hicimos en alianza con la alcaldía de Bogotá, en varios puestos de la ciudad. Entonces fue como nosotros hacíamos entender a la alcaldía que cuando iban a hacer un proceso de digamos, recolección de data de las personas migrantes y refugiadas, que hago como casi todo el tiempo la alcaldía, o sea, censar a la gente, como ¿dónde están los migrantes? Entonces ya no lo hacían como siempre, sino que ahorita le hacían como lo que es este típico puestico de, como con asesoría jurídica. Ahora también tenían una persona encargada para hablar sobre temas de duelo migratorio. es decir, un trabajador social, o una persona experta en el tema. Y eso fue un cambio que parece bobo en la forma de acción del Estado, pero que no lo es. Y fue un cambio que viene de ellos mismos realizando prácticas con nosotros y diciendo, ay, mira, cuando nos vamos a abordar, como, es que de hecho, miren, el caso fue así. Decían, ¿por qué si nosotros tenemos expertos en procesos de duelo con las víctimas del conflicto armado en Colombia, no los tenemos con los migrantes venezolanos, si también los tenemos a la mano? Mejor deberíamos también tener a esas personas acá para abordar a estas personas. Y fue un cambio por completo de cómo interactuaban con las personas migrantes, porque ahorita lo hacen desde el ejercicio de, como dijo Michelle, que es un trauma, que es a largo plazo y que siempre va a estar presente. Y sobre todo en los niños y las niñas. Y creo que esos cambios vienen mucho de uno colocar el tema en la agenda. Yo quisiera decir que obviamente el Estado va a pensarse en una superpolítica pública de entender el duelo migratorio, pero probablemente eso no pase de esa manera por lo mismo que ha dicho Juan José y Michelle, y es que la migración, dentro de muchos temas que hay, la inmigración a mí me parece que es uno de los que más se deshumaniza a las personas, porque todo se hace en un contexto de seguridad nacional, entonces no se piensa para nada en el individuo y sus procesos de sanación como persona.
So I think we're getting close to the end of today's webinar. I want to make sure that if anyone else wants to respond to Sylvia before we do the closing piece today. Well, gracias. Thank you, Alejandro. Juan.
Sí, bueno, yo coincido con lo que han dicho Michelle y Alejandro. Se me lengua acá la traducción. Bueno, coincido con lo que dicen Michelle y Alejandro también, pues, respecto también a la relación que uno tiene muchas veces con financiadores y con el Estado. Creo que, por ejemplo, algo para mejorar en ese tema es, pues, digamos, otorgar la agencia o la participación. Agencia decimos nosotros en términos más de ciencias sociales, pero la agencia propia que tienen las organizaciones al reconocer sus propios problemas como migrantes y demás, ¿no? Hay un poco como una necesidad a veces de intervención de muchos financiadores y de muchos organismos internacionales que quieren tener como un control pues no sé, de la intervención que hacen, y muchas veces este control pues termina también generando unos daños pues sobre los procesos mismos que tienen pues muchas organizaciones, en nuestro caso particular de refugiados y de migrantes. Yo creo que el trabajo del activismo que hemos hecho, que pues han hecho también Alejandro y Michelle, me imagino, y que hemos hecho nosotros también acá, ha sido un trabajo pues minucioso también de poder identificar cuáles son las problemáticas que tenemos. Y en ese sentido, muchas veces somos también nosotros mismos quienes debemos involucrarnos dentro de la resolución de esas problemáticas. Y por eso, pues yo creo que como que una de las principales tareas o una de las principales pues sí, retos que se tienen que entender desde los financiadores es eso, que hay que respetar precisamente pues, la agencia que hemos construido desde las organizaciones para poder identificar nuestras problemáticas y también nuestros planes de acción pues para incidir sobre esas problemáticas, ¿no? Y después de lo que hablan del duelo migratorio, sí, bueno, yo creo que como un plan de Estado así es algo muy difícil de pensar porque pues no sé, o sea, de hecho hasta es reciente como también escuchar muchos temas de psicología como parte de una política pública, eh, pero lo que sí creo es que hay distintos proyectos y distintas organizaciones que buscan mitigar esto de algunas formas, ¿no? Nosotros hablábamos del arte, por ejemplo, como una forma también de mitigación del duelo migratorio y eso pues es a través de la memoria, por ejemplo, ¿no? O sea, son necesarios y son necesarias acciones de memoria para también dejar constancia y dejar pues un precedente sobre lo que ha sido la migración de alguna persona o de grupos de personas en un lugar. Entonces creo que la memoria es muy importante, digamos, para hacer eso a través del arte y demás. Y después, pues ya hay también algunos tipos de acompañamiento que prestan organizaciones, pero sí creo que eso es un reto también que hay que mejorar. Creo que, pues por ejemplo, nosotros planteamos mucho la pedagogía con los funcionarios estatales de los lugares de recibida de distintas personas, porque, por ejemplo, esta es la primera relación que tiene una persona migrante cuando entra a cualquier lugar o cuando va a hacer cualquier trámite, ¿no? El funcionario estatal. Y nosotros creemos que también por ahí hay que tener una relación importante con sensibilizar a los funcionarios y las funcionarias estatales acerca de lo que es la migración, ¿no? Muchas veces se empieza a pensar que el Estado es como cierto ente medio robótico, un poco que simplemente sella pasaportes o algo así, y pues hay que también sensibilizar y humanizar un poco de lo que hay detrás del Estado y de lo que hay detrás también de muchas personas que llegan a acercarse al Estado de alguna forma. Así que por ahí yo creo que también ese es otro trabajo importante que hay que hacer, ¿no? Pues acercarse también a quienes están regulando y regularizando en el día a día la migración, que son pues funcionarios y funcionarias estatales, y pues ver cómo también como los adentramos dentro de la lógica de lo que hablamos desde nuestras organizaciones, ¿no? Así que pues yo creo que es muy importante simplemente ahí para finalizar el trabajo en red y el trabajo interinstitucional, ¿no? Es decir, pensarnos no solamente como una organización aislada, que eso creo que está muy mal, sino pensarnos como una organización en red que está dispuesta a compartir conocimientos, a abrirse, a poder generar, digamos, procesos de construcción de saberes y de diálogos y de, no sé, de acciones, digamos, directamente con más organizaciones. Entonces creo que es un camino que hay que labrar y que ese es el que hemos intentado hacer como organización nosotros.
Gracias, Juan José. I just want to just take a minute to highlight that I've seen a lot of overlaps, and one of the goals of today was to see the overlaps between the work that's happening in Latin America and in the US. And I've seen some overlaps in the themes of like the need to heal, the use of art, right? The use of labels and language, and how people are being kind of dehumanized by using certain language. And I think that this is really important. I think, again, like the idea of this being a global phenomenon of people on the move and the way that we are building agency and power for those individuals and those families and communities. I want to make sure to give each speaker a final opportunity, a 1 minute max call to action to wrap up today's webinar. And anyone can start.
Okay. I just want to say, it doesn't matter how progressive your country is, or how progressive you think your country is. Look at how they treat Indigenous people, and then you'll see who the people really are, because Indigenous people are being harmed worldwide, and especially so in Latin America. And it's all for extractive practice, which ties incredibly to our environment, which yes, creates jobs, but at what cost? It's time that we reframe everything we know about life. And the only way you can do that is if you listen to Indigenous people. So I'll leave it there.
Don't underestimate the power of young people on the move to lead their own efforts to change reality. So if you have opportunities to give voice, and more than voice, decision-making power to young people, give it to them. They're gonna surprise you.
Sí, y yo solamente finalizo diciendo que tampoco hay que subestimar el poder político que tiene el arte y la memoria para poder transformar y sensibilizar realidades, ¿no? Creo que hay un camino muy grande y muy importante de cada vez tomarnos más en serio el arte, no simplemente como una mera actividad de entretenimiento, sino como un hecho de que aporta a la justicia, a la verdad y a la memoria de miles de personas que han sufrido temas muy delicados y muy dolorosos y que encuentran por medio del arte una forma de representarse políticamente, ¿no? Así que pues, creo que es un último mensaje.
Well, I want to give a big shout out, thanks and appreciation to Juan José, Alejandro, and Michelle for taking us through this conversation today, talking to us about your experience, your expertise, and imparting your wisdom on us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you to all the audience members who were able to join us, and we will close out. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Ciao.
Gracias.
Okay, Mario. Thank you, Mario, for setting this up. Y gracias por la interpretación. Debbie Thomas, I believe.
Gracias, Bayoán.
All right, cuídense.
Nos vemos.
Chao.
Adiós.